We're in James, and we're in chapter 4, and we're verse 13. James chapter 4, verse 13. And the thing that, the reason I wanted to show this clip is in chapter 4, this is what James has been talking about. He's been dealing with the subject of vanity and what has happened within this church, within the people that he is writing to here. And one of the things that I want to focus on is, as we go into this text at verse 13 here, and then we come into chapter 5, the beginning of chapter 5, James is going to get really heated and really pointed, like I've never seen another writer in the New Testament. He is going to come after people and people of money. He is going to come after people with ego. He's coming after business people, and it's almost as though he's attacking them hard. And if you're not following the text, if you're not following, you know, there is the law of interpretation. Let me tell you what the law of interpretation is. Anytime that you see somebody take a scripture and extract it and build a teaching or a doctrine around that, chances are that they are wrong or they're in error. So here's the law of interpretation. The law of interpretation is this. You take what the writer says in the context of the chapter. You take what the writer says then in the context of the book. You take what the writer says then in the context of culture. And you take what the writer says then in the context of the geographical region in which he writes. So as we come now into verse 13, we can't forget the chapter in which James is speaking. Remember, he talked about ego. He talked about those that were trying to get up on each other. He talked about those that were fighting and that were bickering and that were grumbling against each other, that were talking against each other. And he says that when you have ego, you unearth all types of wickedness. Ego will unearth all types of wickedness. There's nothing wicked that won't come out. It comes out when we have this ego against other people and jealousy. It unearths all of that. In fact, James goes as far as to say that when you do that, you become like the demonic. You are now acting in the demonic realm. You are being influenced in the demonic, because if you remember, that was the sin of Satan. It was ego. It was, I can be like God. I can be God. And then that was the temptation to Eve. The temptation to Eve wasn't lust. The temptation to Eve wasn't self-preservation. The temptation to Eve was ego. If you eat of this fruit, you will be like God. You will know good and evil like God. You will extend and you will be like him. He was appealing to her ego. And that's what the devil does to you and I all the time. The problem is we become unsensitive to it, because ego becomes a way of life. It becomes just something that we live with. In fact, most of us, we don't even notice our ego when it flares up. We pay it no mind because we are so used to it. And what happens is that because we're so used to it outside the church, it comes in the church and it acts up in the church, and then it causes the same problems in the church that it would cause outside the church. I love that scene. I love Al Pacino, the way he said that. The way he said that. Vanity, that's my favorite sin. Because where there's vanity, I've got a lot of room to work. You're in my hands when you have vanity. Man, I've got you. I've got you right where I want you. I can do all kinds of stuff with that. So now James comes, and in verse 13, he's going to get really pointed. And he says, listen, those of you who are boasting. They're boasting. Those of you who are boasting that today Or tomorrow we will go to another city and we will spend some time and we will go into business and we will make heaps of profit. They're boasting. Tomorrow we're going to go here. Man, we're going to do this and we're going to make a ton of money. But you don't have a clue what tomorrow will bring. For your fleeting life is but a warm breath of air that is visible in the cold only for a moment, and then it vanishes. Think about that when it's a foggy day and you breathe and you see the vapor, and then all of a sudden it disappears. James is saying that's what your life is like. It's that fleeting. The Old Testament uses the phrase that you're like a blade of grass. One day you grow up, and when the sun comes out, it just withers you and you die. Your life is that quick in light of eternity. We think the years that we live mean something, but in light of eternity, it's gone in a hot second. Only for a moment, and then it vanishes. Instead, you should say, our tomorrows are in the Lord's hands, and if he is willing, we will live life to its fullest, and we will do this and that. But here you are boasting in your ignorance, for to be presumptuous about what you'll do tomorrow is evil. You're being presumptuous. He's saying what you should say is that if the Lord is willing, we will do this or that. If God is willing. What is James getting at? He's saying to these people that have this ego. Remember, in context, he's talking to people with an ego. He's not saying that it's wrong to plan your tomorrows. He's not saying that it's wrong to set goals. He's not saying any of that. Keep it within the context. He's talking to people with ego. Well, tomorrow we're going to this and we're going to that and we're going to buy and we're going to sell. Then we're going to make a lot of profit and we're going to make money. And he says to them, your ego is so big that now you act as though you're presumptuous about what you're going to do. You've forgotten that there is a God. You've forgotten that there is a God that controls your life. You've gotten so full of yourself that you've forgotten that there is a God. And what if God says, you may have all these plans, but guess what? Tomorrow your car's not going to run. Tomorrow the water heater is going to blow up in your basement and you're going to be stuck at home. You're going to go down 12 and you think you're going to cross the Rio Vista Bridge and you're going to continue on, but the bridge is stuck open and it's going to be that way half the night. You're going to turn around and come back. You see, that happened to us, trust me. You can have all the plans you want. But the wise man says, if it's God's will that I live life tomorrow, then I will live it to the fullest. But I'm not going to be presumptuous to think that I am God and that I have full control of my life. I'm going to read to you a parable in Luke chapter 12. This to me is one of the most serious of all parables that Jesus spoke. In fact, it is absolutely, it kind of puts the fear of God right in me when I read this. I don't even like reading it. It is only in one of the Gospels. There's only one of the Gospel writers that recorded this because it is so terrifying in what Jesus said. And so Jesus, it says in Luke chapter 12, verse 15, was starting there. It says that Jesus, speaking to the people, Jesus continued and he said, be alert and guard your heart from greed, and always wishing for what you don't have. Boy, that speaks to our society, doesn't it? I'm not into watches. I have a watch. I have a couple watches. I can honestly say that every watch I have has been a gift. I've never bought a watch. And if they weren't gifts, I probably wouldn't wear a watch. I just don't have this thing. I never look at it. I never look at my watch to see what time it is. I've got a watch up there, a clock there. I got a clock there. I've got iPhone with a clock. I got an iPad with a clock. I got a mini with a clock. Clocks everywhere. They're clocking my car. I don't need a watch to tell me the time. I saw this thing, how to tell what are the top 10 watches. And I thought, what are the top 10 watches? So I kind of looked, and then what every CEO, what's the watch that the top 5 CEOs wear? I thought, I don't really care about. And I thought, I could get kind of caught up in this, and I could start wishing for one of these 30,000. There was a watch that was $500,000. There was another watch that went for 3-point-something million. Who would pay that for a watch? But we all kind of wish for stuff we don't have, huh? We all strive for stuff. So he says back to this verse, he says, be alert. Guard your heart from greed, always wishing for what you don't have. For your life can never be measured by the amount of things that you possess. You can't be measured by what you have or you do not have. That doesn't measure you as a person. That's certainly not the ruler that God uses to measure a person's life. He's not impressed with how you dress. Jesus then gave them this illustration. This is where it gets really scary. He says a wealthy landowner had a farm and produced bumper crops. In fact, it filled his barns to overflowing, and he thought, what should I do now that every barn is full and I have nowhere else to store more? I know what I'll do. I'll tear down the barns and I'll build one massive barn that will hold all my grain and goods. Then I'll just sit back surrounded with comfort and ease, and I'll enjoy life with no worries at all. God said to him, what a fool you are. To trust in your riches and not in me. This very night, the messenger of death are demanding to take your life. Then who will get all of your wealth you have stored up for yourself? This is what will happen to all those who fill their lives with everything but God. Isn't that sobering? This is a man that had it going on. This is a man that was getting wealth. This is a man that had a bumper crop. And he said, what should I do with my bumper crop? I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my mid-sized barns, and I'll build one massive barn, and I'll just store it all so that I can live the good life from here on out, not knowing that that night he would die. And the bumper crop and all that he had would go to other people, and he would die. It's amazing. That goes back to what James has said, that when you say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make it here, and I'm going to do that, always remember to bring it into context. If God is willing, I will do this and I will do that. But God may have another plan. That plan may be he may take me home tonight. I do not know. You don't know when you will leave this life. You don't know that. I don't know that. Nobody really knows. Only God knows, but your time may be up. And you won't do a doggone thing that you said you're going to do tomorrow. So what should be said is, if God is willing, I'll fulfill all my plans if God is willing. But I always defer to the one that controls everything. And you know, when you do that, what it does is it puts you right back into perspective. It ain't all about you. It's not all about you. You know, the amazing things, here's the amazing thing about the guy with the bumper crop. Let's go back to that parable, just as a side note, because I've often read that, and I've often wondered that God, you know, he didn't make that happen, did he? He didn't produce the bumper crop. The earth gave it to him. All he does is plant seed. He doesn't know what's going to come of it, but the earth gave it to him. I wonder if he would have taken that bumper crop and started distributing it to the poor. I wonder if the messenger of death would not have claimed his life that night. I just wonder. It's just a thought. I don't know. The text doesn't say it. It's a parable. It's a parable. It's not a true life story. It's a parable. But I wonder if you read into it, what he had, he didn't make happen. God gave it to him. And I wonder if he had a different paradigm about life and about what you have, if his paradigm was different, and if he said, you know, in my medium barns, I have enough to support me. I don't need to build big barns for a bumper crop that I don't need. I'm just hoarding it. I wonder if I give that away, maybe that's why God gave it to him, was to give it away. I wonder if his life would have been spared and he wouldn't have gone home that night. I wonder if what God gives us sometimes is not meant for you. Well, that's a thought, isn't it? I mean, in our culture, it's all about me, isn't it? It's about me getting more, right? It's about me having, I can only drive one car, but it's about me having two, then three, then four, then five, then six, then 7 and 8, 9. It's about me having more. Everything is about me, because if I get it, it's got to be about me. That's why I got it, right? But what if God has given you stuff that isn't for you? It's got somebody else's name on it. What if you're just the caretaker for a minute? You're just the funnel to pass it on. God's looking for somebody to be a caretaker. Can I give this to you to watch for a little while, to watch for it, because then I'm going to tell you who it really belongs to, and then you're to give it to that individual. Could that be? And let me go a step further, since I'm going down the rabbit's trail. I wonder how many people God can actually trust to do that. I mean, what if somebody, what if somebody, you know, most people would talk their way out of it. God walks up and says, I'm going to give you $1,000. You don't need any more money. I'm going to give you $1,000. And this $1,000 I have set aside for somebody that needs it. And they're going to cross your path. And I'm going to whisper to your heart. And I'm going to say, that's who the $1,000 for. I gave it to you to hold. Don't you spend it. You hold it, because I'm going to tell you who to give it to. I wonder how many people would actually hold it. Well, God didn't show anybody to me this week, so it must mean I can spend a little next week. Well, I'm just going to spend a little $100 here. God knows I need that whatever. Oh, I'm going to spend another $500 here. God knows I need that watch I saw on the website. I got to get that watch. And then God says, okay, take what you have and I want you to give it to that person. Well, how come there's only $50 left? I gave you $1,000. I wonder how many people could be trusted. Just a thought. That's something that only you can answer. I pray God keep me in a place where I can always be trusted. But I'm sure I have my moments. Everybody does. But it comes down to keeping you in proper perspective about who you are and what your paradigm is. Do you know, if you live life like you could be gone tomorrow, what's important to you today changes, doesn't it? If I'm gone tomorrow, what I have in the bank no longer matters, because I ain't going to be here to spend it. So if you tell me I've got a month to live, my whole world changes in how I view stuff. Because everything that I deem important is no longer of value to me, because I'm going to leave it. It's like the story. The very wealthy man died, and he said in his will, he said, I want everything that I own I want everything that I own to be given, to be buried with me in the casket. I want all my money in the casket. So they had the funeral, and everybody walked by the casket, and they looked inside, and they knew what his will was because it was talked about. But everybody walked by the viewing, and they didn't see tons of money in there. So when they had shut the casket and they put it in the ground, they went to the widow, and they said, we're a little concerned because in his will, he said that he wanted everything in the bank to be buried with him. And she said, I know. And they said, well, how come you didn't do it? And she said, well, I did. I wrote a check, and I dropped it in that. Go ahead. All right, verse 17. Verse 17. So if you know of an opportunity to do the right thing today, yet you refrain from doing it, you are guilty of sin. Now again, let's tie that back into the text. And what James is saying, I'm going to read it from the New Living Translation. He says, remember it is sin to know what you ought to do and then to not do it. Remember, that becomes sin. So what James is saying, he's saying if you know the right way to live and in the right frame of mind, remember he's talking about ego, he's talking about arguing, he's talking about trying to get up on somebody and get ahead of somebody and all of that. And he's talking about the evilness that comes out of it and the jealousy that is birthed in it and all of that. And then he targets them and he says, you're so egotistical that you think you have absolute control of your life and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And you never stop and think for a minute that really God has control, and you ought to say if the Lord is willing and bring it back into perspective. And then he ends this chapter, he says, so if you know what the right thing to do, if you know what is right, but you choose not to do it, you choose to continue to live the way you're living, to you it becomes sin. Plain and simple. So if I know this, anytime I step over that line, anytime my ego flares up and I've got to be the top dog, anytime that happens, I know what is right, and to me it becomes instant sin. Going back to Facebook, you're going to think I'm a Facebook addict by the time today is done. But back to Facebook, somebody shared a picture with me that I wish I could have printed it and put it on my wall. Somebody shared a picture, and it was a pack of wolves and how the pack of wolves travel. And there's about 20 wolves, and they were kind of grouped 2 and 3 and then lined up, but it was a long line. They were tracking through the snow, and it called them out. It said the first set of wolves, the first 1 and 2 wolves, these are the aged ones. These are the older ones, and they're in front because they set the pace for everybody else. In other words, they're going to go a little slower, but everybody has to go slow so that you can't pass them. So you go as fast as they go. So that tells me that they're honoring their age. They're not leaving them behind. They're honoring their age. Okay, I get that. Then they said, they had little circles, and they said, this next group of wolves, these are the strong wolves, and they're in the middle of the pack, and they're protecting the pack from the right and the left from predators coming in. And they're staged along with the main body of the wolves, and they're there to protect. They're the warrior wolves. They're the ones that they see a predator come, and they're gonna leave the pack to do the fighting, and the pack then sticks together. And then it goes way down. There's one wolf detached from the pack, and they said this wolf is the leader of the pack. Whoa, what do you mean? The leader of the pack. They said he is the leader. He is the chief wolf. And he stays behind because he watches the pack, and he's in a position because of where he is to dart out in any direction, behind, to the left, to the right. He'll run full circle around to the front to kill any predator that those warrior wolves don't get. And I thought, if people in business, if people in church business could get, how did Jesus say you lead? You don't lead from the front of the pack. You lead from behind the pack as one who protects. What Jesus said, what is the way up? Is to become the servant. You see, haven't we reversed that all? We've reversed it to where it makes me sick sometimes. I study business, and I will tell you, I can't name off all the companies. That'd probably blow your mind if I did. But some of the biggest companies in America today. I worked in a business where the CEO, his office was about as big as half this room, and it had a clear shot view of the Bay Bridge. We were on the 17th floor at Pine and Market, where the Bay Bridge was eye level. And his office was the corner office. You get what I'm saying? I mean, he had panoramic view. I mean, it was breathtaking. His desk was the biggest desk I've ever seen in my life. When we met, when I'd go to his office, we'd sit in a little couch seating area. And he'd call for the secretary, bring us some coffee. Would you like tea, Scott, or coffee? And he'd bring us our coffee and danishes and stuff like that. I mean, just amazing, amazing, amazing wealth. I study business. It's a hobby of mine. And I started studying the top corporations in America and what made them the biggest. And one of the things that I noticed in every one of them, almost without fail, every one of them, the CEO didn't have the corner office. In fact, I read about one company, Fortune 500 company, where the CEO sat in the front, and when those that went to interview him walked up, they thought he was the receptionist. And they asked, Ken, we're here to meet with so-and-so, the CEO. He goes, that's me. They said, well, where's your office? He said, you're looking at it. He said, I'm where my people are. And I work in the middle of people, and I have an open door policy. Obviously, there are no doors to my office. Anybody can walk up. The janitor can walk up and give me an idea. Anybody can do it. And I started, honestly, I followed that trend. I read about a company the other day. Incredible. Where the CEO doesn't have an office. He goes to any desk in the business that's empty because that person is sick that day, and that's where he sits. And that's where he works. Now, I say that's a leader I can respect. He doesn't have a private parking place, and he's church folk, that's the way it ought to be in church too. Can I get an amen there? Sometimes I get a little jealous of some of the guys I know because their church has a lot of money and they get a lot of nice things and they take a lot of nice vacations. And I've been in their offices and they have a lot of really nice offices. And that's okay for them. That's okay for them, and I'm not saying that's all wrong. That's okay for them. But I don't know what it is about me, personally. I'd rather God keep me in a place where that doesn't necessarily happen. Because then I don't have to contend with ego. And I can know that God looks at my heart and he sees that anything I do is driven by a heart of love, and it's not driven by anything else. And I think in the end, as I get older, in the end, I think that's what's going to pay the dividends. When I stand before the Lord, I think that's going to pay the dividends. I worry about these guys with jets and private airports and all of that. I worry about that. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. That type of extravagance in the name of God. It's wrong. And I believe there's a price that's going to be paid when you stand before the Lord. And I'll go on record saying that. Shame on them. Chapter 5 and verse 1, and we're going to take a few verses here and then we're going to wrap up. I think I will look at my watch because I can't see that one. Oh, I got another hour or so. Sorry, I looked at my watch, huh? You know what they did? I think I told you, they put a counter right back up there. That's horrible. I said, is that supposed to tell me when to shut up? It says I've got 7 minutes and 11 seconds. Do you know that buzzes when it hits 0? They just mute it so I don't get embarrassed, but it tells me it's time to shut up. Everybody wants to go. Be quiet. I won't mention anybody's name that bought that and put it up, but it starts with a K-E-V-I-N. All right. I didn't say his name. All right. Let's drop down. We're going to take a few verses here. It says in verse 5, this is where he gets hard-nosed again. You have to understand the text. Who is he talking to? He's not talking about people with money because there's no sin in having money. Understand that. There is no sin in having money. There's no sin in being rich. God uses wealthy people. A lot of times he uses wealthy people to bless people that are not so wealthy so they get by. Okay. But he says, listen, all you who are rich, for it is time to weep the howl over the misery that will overtake you. Your riches lie rotting, your fine clothing eaten by moths, and your gold and your silver are corroded as a witness against you. I think he's talking about death. I think that what you have becomes a witness against you. He says, you have hoarded up treasure for the last days, but it will become fire to burn your flesh. Listen, can't you hear the cries of the laborers over the wages you have fraudulently held back from those who work for you? You cheated them. The cries for justice of those you've cheated have reached the ears of the Lord of armies. You have indulged yourselves with every luxury and pleasure this world offers, but you're only suffering your heart full for a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered good and innocent people who had no power to defend themselves. Why? Because you had riches and they didn't. It's the old saying, when you go to court, he who has the money wins, right? Because he who doesn't have the money gets the public defender, but the rich guy gets the top dog attorney, and chances are he's going to get off, and good luck with your public defender. You may be going away. But if you had the money and you could afford to hire the rich attorney, chances are you might get off. That's what James is saying. He says you use your money for all the wrong things. And all of the things that you have and that you deem important in life, they're going to speak against you because they're going to rot. They're being held for the day of judgment. God is counting and taking inventory, and there is a day coming that will be a day of judgment. And then in verse 7, he says, meanwhile, brothers and sisters, speaking back to us, meanwhile, brothers and sisters, be patient and filled with the expectation as we wait for the appearing of the Lord. Think about the farmer who has to be patient, who patiently waits for the earth's harvest as it ripens because of the early and latter rains. What is James saying? He's speaking. Remember, there's a class distinction in this group of people. And now he's speaking to those that have nothing. He's speaking to those that don't fit that category of those that have a lot and that are rich and that are greedy and that are hurting people. He's now talking back to the people. And basically he's saying this. He says, be patient. Be patient. It's like the farmer that waits for the harvest. Be patient, because there is a day coming. It might not seem like it now, but there is a day coming where you and I will stand before the Lord. So be patient. Continue to do what is right. Be patient, because we're going to come before the Lord. That day will come, is what he said. And then in verse 8, he says, so you also keep your hopes high and be patient, for the presence of the Lord is drawing closer, since each of you are a part of God's family. Never complain or grumble about each other, so that judgment will not come on you, for the true judge is near and very ready to appear. What does James say? He said, you know, it's easy when you feel that people have gotten up on you. It's easy when you feel like people have taken advantage of you. It's easy when you're a have-not and somebody that is a have has used what they have to take advantage of you. It's easy at that point to be bitter and to be envious and have hate. It's easy to have that because you feel mistreated. But James says, be patient. It's like the farmer waiting for the crop. He's planted his seed, he's watered. He's got to now wait for it to grow. He says, be patient, because there is coming a day. You might have to wait for it, but there is coming a day where God justifies, where God judges, where God justifies. He said, be patient and wait for that day. And in the interim, don't speak ill of other people. You see how he marries the two together? You see, I can be patient, but it helps me to be patient if I can talk smack about you in the meantime. I feel a little better if I can really talk bad about you and what a bad person you are because of what you're doing. It kind of helps me a little bit. But James says, no. Be patient and wait for the Lord. And in your patience, don't speak evil of other people. Why? Because it's not your job to judge them. God will judge them. That's not your job. You leave that to the Lord. And then he says, be careful, because when you're so busy judging, you'll bring judgment upon yourself. Because when you're judging somebody, this is not rocket science. If I'm judging you, then I'm to be judged because I'm judging you. I'm doing as much wrong as what I'm judging you for doing. It's kind of like this. If Deborah makes me mad, if she does something that really offends me, and she's in the wrong, like she always is, she's in the wrong, and I come off on her, and I'm going, you crazy, good for nothing, bond chick, you know, blah, 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 all Swedes are like that, and blah, 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 and I just come down on her because she's wrong. What did I just do? I think I'm just as wrong as her now. So I'm judging her, God's judging me. So if I just be quiet about it, I don't bring judgment on myself, because I'm all cool about it. I'm waiting for God. I'm going to stand before him one day. So I'm just going to we read this about our mouth earlier in James, didn't we? I'm just going to keep this closed a little bit, because I don't want to stand before God and have to give account for that. Well, God, you don't understand. She was an idiot. He goes, so are you. But right now we're talking about you, not her. You were an idiot. You see? So James says, you're always going to have that. You're going to have people that use their authority and use their power and you use those things. You're always going to have that. And I don't care what you have. I don't care. There'll always be somebody that has more. There's always somebody that has more. So whoever you're comparing yourself with and what have you, James is saying, knock it off. Life ain't all about that. It ain't all about that. You ain't taking a dime with you. It ain't all about that. And you may think that you have use of it for another 30 years, but you don't know that either. You may have use of it for another 30 minutes. So don't put that much value in it. Don't build your life around it like the man that built the bigger barn. Don't build your life around it. Because when you start building your life around it, many times it's God saying it's time to come home. And we're going to end this right now. And if God is blessing you, praise God, enjoy it. Enjoy it. But always ask yourself this one question. Is it possible that God is blessing me and it's not really for me? Could that be possible? Now, I won't say that every time it is, but I'll say that there are a good number of times that God will give you something that is not meant for you. And then it's what you do with it that counts. So you get something, whatever it is, small, big, somewhere in between. It's always safe to ask yourself, God, thank you for the blessing. Is it for me? If so, I'm going to have a good time with this. But if it's not for me, then I really want you to speak to my heart, because I want to push this aside. And I was talking to a pastor friend of mine, and we were talking about honorariums. And I was arguing the point. I said, I was away a couple of weeks back, and every time I would be given an honorarium, most always I would turn it down. Do you know that I thought that was being humble, but that was being proud and being humble. It was an act of pride. Well, look at me, I'm turning down the honorarium. I must be pretty good. I'm humble. Way to go, humble Scott. So they gave me an envelope, and we were invited to an event after church, so we were there. I just put the envelope in my coat. And so on the way home, I said, oh, shoot, I still have that envelope. I told Deborah, I said, I'm going to mail it back to them and tell them thank you, but God bless you. And they're a wealthy church. They weren't hurting for money at all. And so Deborah said, you better not, because we got this bill and that bill, and it could be that God is blessing you to meet our expenses. So I said, yeah, you're right. So anyway, so I was blessed through that. I was blessed, and we kept it to meet the. So I'm talking to this guy and this pastor, and he rebukes me. He says, that's very wrong. He said, you don't do that. He says, because somebody that gives you something, if you turn it down, you rob them of a blessing and you embarrass them in the process. And so he illustrated, he said, we have a very wealthy man in our church, and we had a visiting missionary come in, and the man wrote a check for this missionary's needs, whatever they were. He wrote a big check, and he gave it to the missionary, and the missionary said, no, I can't take that, I can't take that. The man was so offended because he felt God told him to give it to him, that you won't receive it. What are you saying? I'm not worthy to give it to you. That the man left the church and never came back. So then he said, my wife has a practice that whenever somebody gives her money, she has a practice, she tucks it away and puts it in a special place in her purse. And she said, God, I don't think this is for me, but it's for somebody. And I'm going to leave it tucked away in this little side pocket in my purse. And when that somebody crosses my path, you tell me and I'll pass it on. And I thought to myself, what a cool thing to do. Are you kidding? Why didn't I think of that? What a cool thing to do. So anytime that something crosses my path that's out of the ordinary, I kind of put it aside and say, God, for me or for somebody else? And I let him decide. That way I'm always within the perfect will of God. Amen?